I had no idea that the most ordinary knock of my life was about to change everything. Every evening around 6, I'd stop by Mrs. Eleanor's door, Unit 4B, my elderly neighbor. I'd bring groceries, fix a loose hinge, sit with her for a few minutes if she needed company. It was simple, it was quiet, it felt like the right thing to do. That Tuesday evening was no different. I knocked twice, adjusted the grocery bag on my arm, waited. The door opened, and my entire chest locked up. She wasn't Eleanor. She was tall, composed, and devastating in the way that only someone completely unaware of their presence can be. Dark wavy hair falling past her shoulders, sharp eyes that I recognized instantly, because those same eyes had once looked across a boardroom table and told me calmly and professionally that my position had been eliminated, my boss, my former boss. She stared at me. I stared at her. The grocery bag crinkled in the silence, her lips parted, just slightly, like she was searching for words that hadn't been invented yet. And then, from somewhere deep inside the apartment, I heard Eleanor's warm, familiar voice call out, "Oh good. That must be him. Let him in, dear." She didn't move, not immediately. She just stood there in the doorway, one hand resting on the door frame, the other hanging at her side, perfectly still, like she was deciding something. Her expression wasn't angry, it wasn't cold. It was something harder to read than either of those things. It was surprised, and if I'm being honest, so was I. "You're the neighbor," she finally said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was low, measured, the same tone she used in meetings when she already knew the answer but wanted to hear you say it anyway. "Apparently," I said. A beat of silence stretched between us. The grocery bag crinkled again. I shifted my weight. She stepped aside. Eleanor was in her armchair by the window, a knitted blanket across her lap, her reading glasses perched at the end of her nose. She was 73 years old and had the kind of face that made you feel immediately forgiven for whatever you'd done wrong that day. She looked at me and smiled like I was exactly who she expected. Then she looked at her niece and smiled like she was expecting that too. "Marcus," she said warmly, gesturing toward the woman standing rigid near the door. "This is my niece, Diana. She'll be staying with me for a little while." I looked at Diana. Diana looked at me. "We've met," Diana said. "Have you?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious. "She was my boss," I said, a pause. "He worked in my company," Diana added carefully. "He was let go during the restructuring last quarter." Eleanor absorbed this quietly. Then she folded her hands in her lap and said, with the calm of someone who has lived long enough to find almost everything amusing, "Well, isn't that something?" I set the groceries on the kitchen counter and tried to make myself useful, which, in that apartment, in that moment, meant keeping my eyes on the task and my thoughts to myself. But I could feel Diana watching me from across the room, not suspiciously. More like, carefully. The way you look at something that doesn't quite fit where you've placed it in your mind. I understood the feeling, because the woman I remembered from the office was immaculate in a different way. Boardroom immaculate, armor-plated. She walked into rooms and the temperature shifted slightly. Not from coldness exactly, but from authority. The kind of presence that makes people sit up straighter without being asked. Here in Eleanor's small, warm apartment, with its soft lamplight and the faint smell of chamomile tea, she looked different, not smaller. Never smaller, but unguarded, just slightly, around the edges. "You do this every day?" she asked from behind me. I turned around. She was leaning against the doorframe between the kitchen and the living room, arms folded loosely, not defensively. Just the way someone stands when they're trying to look more comfortable than they are. "Most days," I said. Eleanor mentioned her regular delivery service stopped coming, so I started picking things up on my way back from the gym. She glanced at the groceries, then back at me. She never told me someone was helping her. There was something quiet in that sentence, something that landed a little heavier than the words themselves. "She probably didn't want you to worry," I said. Diana looked at Eleanor through the doorway. Eleanor had conveniently become very absorbed in her book. Something moved across Diana's face, a flicker. Too fast to name. She straightened up, cleared her throat, and said, professional composure sliding back into place like a second skin, "Well, thank you. For looking after her, don't mention it." "I won't," she said. And then, just barely, so briefly I almost missed it, the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, But close, I said goodnight to Eleanor, who squeezed my hand and told me to get some rest. I nodded to Diana on my way out. She nodded back. The door closed behind me. I stood in the hallway for a second longer than necessary. Did she know? I kept thinking as I walked back to my apartment. Did she know this whole time that the neighbor helping her aunt was the same person she let go? And if she didn't, what did it mean that she did now? She was still there the next evening, and the one after that. By the fourth day, I stopped being surprised to find her in Eleanor's apartment when I arrived. By the sixth day, she stopped looking quite so stiff when she heard my knock. By the eighth day, Eleanor had quietly arranged it so that Diana was always the one who answered the door. I noticed. I didn't say anything. Eleanor noticed that I noticed. She said nothing either. She just smiled into her tea. Diana and I had a rhythm now. If you could call it that. It was less of a rhythm and more of a careful negotiation. Two people occupying the same small space with the full awareness of their shared history, trying to be civil about it. She was precise, organized. She had Eleanor's medications arranged in a weekly pill organizer, color-coded. She kept a handwritten list on the refrigerator, appointments, dietary notes, things to restock. When I arrived each evening, she'd sometimes be on a work call, pacing the length of the living room in slow, deliberate steps, her voice low and controlled. I'd unpack groceries, fix whatever needed fixing. Try not to listen, Trey. You're doing it wrong, she said one evening. I was assembling a small shelf unit Eleanor had ordered. I looked up. Doing what wrong? She pointed at the instruction sheet in my hand. You're on step 4. You skipped step 3. I looked at the shelf, then at the sheet, then back at her. It looks fine. It won't be fine in 3 weeks when the left side collapses. I stared at her for a moment. She stared back, completely serious, arms folded, one eyebrow slightly elevated. I looked back at the shelf. Quietly, I undid step 4 and went back to step 3. From the armchair, Eleanor made a soft sound that might have been a cough. Or a laugh, difficult to say. You're very optimistic, Diana said one evening, not as a compliment. More like an observation she hadn't quite decided what to do with. I was fixing a dripping kitchen faucet. She was sitting at the small table nearby, reviewing something on her laptop, occasionally glancing over. Is that a problem? I asked. It's impractical. Most good things are. She made a small sound, not quite agreement, not quite dismissal, somewhere in between. Eleanor talks about you, she said after a moment. I tightened the fitting. Good things, I hope. She says you remind her of someone she used to know. She paused. She wouldn't tell me who. I smiled without looking up. That sounds like Eleanor. It's irritating, Diana said flatly. Or maybe she just thinks some things are better figured out on your own. Silence, then quietly, almost reluctantly. You're irritating too. And yet here we are, I said. When I finally looked up, she was looking at her screen, but her jaw had softened, and the very corner of her mouth, just the corner, was doing that thing again. But beneath the dry exchanges and the careful distance, I was starting to see things, small things, the way she always checked Eleanor's blanket before she sat down, adjusting it without being asked, without making it a moment, the way her voice changed when she spoke to her aunt, dropped half a register, lost its professional edge entirely. The way she'd sometimes stand by the window after Eleanor fell asleep in her chair, looking out at the street below with an expression that had nothing to do with whatever she'd been working on 5 minutes earlier. She was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the deeper kind. And one night, it was late. Eleanor had already gone to bed, and I was about to leave. I found Diana sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop closed, and both hands wrapped around a mug that had clearly gone cold a long time ago. She wasn't reading. She wasn't working. She was just sitting there, staring at nothing. I stopped in the doorway. She looked up and saw me watching her, and something crossed her face. Something unguarded and raw and completely unintentional. She opened her mouth, then closed it, straightened her spine, lifted her chin. "Good night, Marcus," she said, quietly, carefully. Like a door being eased shut, I nodded. "Good night, Diana." I walked out into the hallway and stood there in the quiet for a long moment. She had almost said something. I was almost certain of it. What was she carrying? And why wouldn't she let anyone help her carry it? It happened on a Wednesday. Eleanor had a late afternoon appointment. A routine check with her physician 2 blocks over. Diana had taken her, and I'd arrived at the apartment a little earlier than usual to fix the bathroom door that had been sticking for a week. I let myself in with the spare key Eleanor had given me months ago, did the work, and was washing my hands in the kitchen when I heard the front door open. Eleanor's voice floated in first, warm, unhurried, then Diana's, lower, tighter. I stepped into the living room to let them know I was there, and stopped. Diana had her back to me. She was helping Eleanor out of her coat, and Eleanor was patting her niece's hand in that quiet, deliberate way she had, the way that meant she was trying to pass something through her fingertips that couldn't be said in words. "The doctor said it's manageable," Eleanor said gently. "I know what he said." Diana's voice was steady, perfectly steady, but her hands weren't. I watched her fold Eleanor's coat over her arm, slowly, carefully, like she needed something to do with her fingers. I cleared my throat softly. Diana turned, and for exactly 1 second, one unguarded, unarmored second, I saw everything she was holding. The fear, the guilt, the particular exhaustion of someone who has been strong for so long they've forgotten what the alternative feels like. Then it was gone. "I didn't know you were still here," she said. "Just finish the door," I said. "I'll get out of your way." "Stay," Eleanor said simply, settling into her armchair. "I'll make tea." "You won't," Diana and I said at the same time. Eleanor looked between us with quiet delight. Diana made the tea. I sat across from her at the kitchen table while Eleanor dozed in the living room, the television murmuring softly in the background. The apartment felt smaller at night, warmer, like the walls had moved slightly inward. She wrapped both hands around her mug, the same way she had the other night, and stared into it like it contained something worth reading. "How long has she had it?" I asked quietly. She didn't pretend not to understand. "The joint condition. 2 years. She didn't tell me until 6 months ago." A pause. "She didn't want me to rearrange my life. She's protective of you. She raised me," Diana said, simply, completely, like that explained everything. And it did. I let the silence sit for a moment. "She raised you?" I asked. Something shifted in her expression. Not discomfort, more like the careful feeling of opening a drawer you haven't opened in a long time. "My parents traveled extensively for work. Eleanor was constant." She turned the mug slowly in her hands. "She's the one who told me I was smart enough to lead when I was 17 and didn't believe it. She's the reason I went after the position I did." A quiet breath. "She's the reason for most of the good things, actually." I watched her say it. The way her voice stayed controlled but her eyes moved to the middle distance. The way she held herself together by sheer habit. "She's proud of you," I said. "I know." Her jaw tightened slightly. "I just want to make sure she's—" She stopped. "Reset. I want to make sure she's comfortable." "She is," I said. "She's happy." She talks about her garden books and her Tuesday programs and the crossword she refuses to finish because finishing it would mean starting a new one. I looked at her steadily. "She's not suffering, Diana. She's just getting older, and she wants you here, not managing her. Just here." Diana looked at me, really looked at me, the way people rarely do in conversation, like she was trying to determine whether I was real. "You're very calm," she said finally. "Someone in this kitchen has to be." The corner of her mouth moved. Then, surprisingly quietly, she laughed, just briefly, small and real and nothing like the composed exhale she used in professional settings. It was the most unguarded thing I'd heard from her. I felt it somewhere behind my ribs. We talked for another hour. About Eleanor. About small things. About nothing particularly important. But the conversation had a texture to it, easy and careful at the same time. The way conversations feel when two people are still learning how much space they can take up with each other. At one point, she teased me about my optimism again. "You actually believe everything works out," she said, not mocking, just genuinely puzzled. "Don't you?" I asked. She considered it. "I believe things can be made to work out, with the right planning. That's just optimism in a business suit." She blinked, then that corner of her mouth again, deeper this time. "That's possibly the most irritating thing you've ever said." "Give it time," I said. She shook her head slowly, but she was smiling now, properly, fully, and it changed her entire face. I made myself look away. I was putting on my jacket to leave when the intercom buzzed. Diana frowned at it, a small, precise frown, and pressed the answer button. A voice came through the speaker. Male. Smooth. familiar in the way that immediately told me it was familiar to her. "Diana." "It's me. Can we talk?" Her entire body changed, not dramatically. She didn't flinch or recoil. But something in her spine went rigid. The kind of stillness that isn't calm at all. She looked at the intercom for a long moment, then at me. Her eyes were unreadable again. All that warmth from the last hour, carefully, quietly shuddered. Who was he, and why did his voice make her look like she was bracing for impact? His name was Richard. I learned that within the first 40 seconds of him walking through the door, because he introduced himself to me with the particular confidence of a man who expects his name to mean something to whoever he's meeting. He was well-dressed, broad-shouldered, the kind of handsome that photographs well and reads as trustworthy in a room full of strangers. He shook my hand firmly, smiled with every tooth, and said, "Richard Calloway. And you are?" "Marcus." Marcus." He repeated it the way people repeat names they've already filed under irrelevant. Then he turned his full attention back to Diana, and I watched something happen to her that I hadn't seen before. She became very, very still, not frozen, controlled, the way someone stands when they've practiced standing in a particular person's presence and made a quiet science of giving nothing away. "You didn't return my calls," Richard said. His voice was gentle, concerned, performed. "I've been busy," Diana said, "with Eleanor." He glanced around the apartment with something that wasn't quite sympathy. "Of course. How is she?" "Resting. Good, good." He slid his hands into his pockets and rocked slightly on his heels. Comfortable, unhurried, filling the room with his ease the way certain people do. Then his eyes moved back to me, reassessing now, less casual than before. "I didn't realize Eleanor had other visitors this late." "Marcus helps with the apartment," Diana said. Her tone was perfectly neutral. "He's Eleanor's neighbor." "Ah." Richard smiled at me. "Neighborly of you. Just practical," I said. He held my gaze for exactly 1 beat too long before looking away. I should have left. I knew I should have left. But Eleanor had chosen that exact moment to appear in the living room doorway. Unhurried, wrapped in her knitted cardigan, reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, she looked at Richard with an expression I hadn't seen her wear before. Not unfriendly, but measured. The way someone looks at a weather forecast they don't entirely trust. "Richard," she said warmly enough. "This is unexpected. I was in the area," he said. "Thought I'd stop by, see how you're both doing." "How thoughtful." Eleanor moved to her armchair with the careful grace of someone who has learned to make slowness look deliberate. "Marcus, sit down. There's no reason to rush off." I glanced at Diana. Diana's expression said nothing, which, I was learning, was its own kind of language. I sat down. Richard was charming in the way that requires an audience. He told a story about a recent trip, asked Eleanor about her health with practiced warmth, laughed at the right moments, touched Diana's shoulder once, briefly, lightly, and I watched her not react to it with the careful precision of someone who has trained themselves not to. But I noticed, and he noticed that I noticed. "So," Richard said, turning to me with relaxed curiosity, "how long have you been helping out here, Marcus?" "Several months," I said. "That's generous, especially given." He paused, smiled. "Well, people are busy. It's rare someone makes the time." "It's not a sacrifice," I said. "I enjoy it." He tilted his head slightly. "Diana mentioned you two have a professional history." The room shifted, not visibly, but it shifted. Diana's eyes moved to me, fast, almost imperceptible. "We worked at the same company," I said evenly. "Right." Richard leaned back, comfortable. "Unfortunate situation, the downsizing. Diana carries that kind of thing, the decisions that affect people." He looked at her with something that was designed to look like tenderness. "She's always been too conscientious for her own good." Diana said nothing, but her fingers, resting on the arm of the sofa, pressed down slightly against the fabric. He stayed for 40 minutes. When he finally left, he kissed Diana once on the cheek, and she let him, in the same controlled, distant way she'd let him touch her shoulder earlier. At the door, he shook my hand again and told me it was good to meet me, and his eyes said something his voice didn't. The door closed. The three of us sat in the quiet that followed. Eleanor was the first to speak. "He always did know how to fill a room," she said, mildly. Carefully, Diana stood up and began collecting the cups from the coffee table. "He's just checking in," she said. Said Eleanor. I watched Diana move to the kitchen, efficient, purposeful. giving herself something to do with her hands. And I thought about what Richard had said, about conscientious decisions, about people being affected, about the careful way he'd inserted himself between Diana and me without ever saying anything direct enough to be challenged. I'm a distraction. The thought arrived quietly. That's how he sees me. That's how he wants her to see me. I looked at my hands. Was he right? What was I doing here exactly? Helping an elderly woman I genuinely cared for, yes. But sitting in her living room at 9 in the evening, noticing the way her niece laughed, and the way her fingers pressed into sofa cushions, and the way a man's voice on an intercom could close every door she'd just opened. That was something else entirely. And I didn't know yet whether it was something I had any right to feel. Diana came back from the kitchen. She stood near the window, looked out at the street below, the same way she had that other night. But this time I could see the tension across her shoulders, the careful architecture of someone holding something in. "You should go," she said, not unkindly. "Diana, I'm fine, Marcus." Her voice was steady, quiet, final. I stood, picked up my jacket. At the door, I paused. "For what it's worth," I said, "you don't owe anyone access to the version of yourself you're still figuring out." She turned from the window. Her eyes found mine across the room, and for one long, unguarded moment, she looked exactly like the woman who had almost said something in the kitchen 3 nights ago. Then she nodded. Once. Barely. I left, and the whole walk back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just been decided. I just didn't know yet which way it had fallen. She pulled back. Not dramatically. Not with a confrontation or a slammed door or anything that might have been easier to respond to. Diana simply contracted, became professional again, became managed. When I arrived the following evening, she was on a call. She nodded at me from across the room and turned toward the window. The groceries went on the counter. The loose cabinet hinge I'd been meaning to fix got fixed. Eleanor watched me from her armchair with quiet, patient eyes. When Diana finished her call, she thanked me, politely, correctly, like I was a service she had subscribed to. It continued like that for 4 days. The warmth from that Wednesday evening, the tea, the laughing, the conversation that had moved like something alive between us, might as well have been something I'd imagined. She was courteous. She was composed. She answered questions directly and didn't ask any of her own. And every evening, I walked back to my apartment wondering whether I should just stop coming. On the 5th day, I almost didn't. I stood outside my door with the grocery bag in my hand and genuinely considered setting it down, going inside, and letting this whole complicated situation simplify itself. Then I thought about Eleanor, and I went. Eleanor was alone that evening. Diana was out. A work dinner, Eleanor told me, waving her hand in a way that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. I made dinner. We ate together, and afterward Eleanor sat across from me, with her hands folded and her eyes very direct. "She's frightened," Eleanor said. I looked up. "I'm not asking you to fix it," she continued. "I just want you to understand it. What is she frightened of?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city murmured its usual sounds: traffic, distant voices, the ordinary music of people going about their lives. "Richard was not a cruel man," she said carefully, "but he was a consuming one. He needed Diana to be a particular version of herself. Polished, directed, impressive." She paused. She was very good at being that version, so good that she forgot she had others. I was quiet. She came to me, after the marriage ended, and sat in that chair where you're sitting now. And she didn't cry. She didn't fall apart. Eleanor's voice was soft. She just said, "I don't know who I am when no one's watching." A pause. That's the most frightening thing a person can realize about themselves. I stared at the table. "And then you showed up," Eleanor said. "Being exactly who you are, every single day, without performance, without agenda." She tilted her head slightly. "That's terrifying to someone who's only ever trusted what they could control." I didn't say anything for a long time. "She's been seeing Richard again?" I asked. "He's been present," Eleanor said, which wasn't an answer. Which was entirely an answer. Diana came home while I was washing the dishes. She stopped when she saw me. Something moved across her face. Relief maybe, or its complicated cousin. "Eleanor's asleep," I said. "I made the pasta she likes. Thank you." She set her bag down, stood near the table. Neither of us spoke for a moment then. "Marcus." Her voice was careful, measured. I think it might be better if— Don't, I said, quietly. I turned off the faucet, turned around. Don't do the professional version of this. Not here. Her jaw tightened. I'm not. You're about to tell me this has become complicated and it would be cleaner if I just came by during the day when you're not here. I looked at her steadily. Am I wrong? A long silence. She looked away first. He wants to try again, she said, quietly. To the floor. Richard, he thinks we made a mistake. What do you think? She didn't answer Diana. I kept my voice even. What do you think? She pressed her lips together. Her hands found the back of the chair, holding it the way she held everything when she needed something solid. I think, she said slowly, that what's familiar feels safer than what's— She stopped. Then what's what? I asked. She looked up at me, and the words she didn't say hung in the air between us, like something both of us could see and neither of us could quite reach. If you've been feeling this story, this is exactly the moment to hit that like button, because the next part is where everything either breaks or becomes something beautiful. I picked up my jacket. I stood there for a moment with it in my hands, and I made myself say the honest thing, the thing I'd been circling for weeks. I'm not asking you for anything, I said. I never have. But I want you to know that the version of you that laughed in this kitchen last Wednesday, the one who talks about Eleanor like she's the axis of everything good in your life. I paused. That's not a version you have to earn back. She's just you. She's been you the whole time. Diana's eyes were very bright. She didn't speak. I nodded once. Put my jacket on. Good night, Diana. I walked to the door behind me, so quiet I almost missed it. I heard the smallest sound, not a word. Not quite, just a breath that had been held a very long time, finally let go. I didn't turn around. I walked out into the hallway and stood with my back against the wall, eyes closed, heart doing something loud and inconvenient in my chest. Eleanor's voice came back to me. She's frightened. So was I. The difference was, I already knew which direction I wanted to walk. The question was whether she'd ever be ready to walk the same way. And standing in that hallway, I genuinely didn't know if she would, and that uncertainty, that terrible, honest uncertainty, was the hardest thing I'd felt in years. 3 days passed, I still came. I still brought the groceries and fixed whatever needed fixing and sat with Eleanor in the quiet of her apartment. But Diana was absent, not physically, she was there. But the space between us had a different quality now. Like a room where the furniture has been rearranged in the dark. Everything still present, just not where you remembered it. Eleanor watched us both with the patience of someone who has seen this particular human drama performed many times before and knows exactly how it ends. She never said a word. She didn't need to. On the 4th morning, I was in the hallway outside my apartment, keys in hand, about to leave for an early job interview, my first serious one since the downsizing, when Eleanor's door opened, not Diana, Eleanor herself. Moving slowly, deliberately, with her cardigan pulled close and her reading glasses on her head. Marcus, she said, walk with me to the window at the end of the hall. It wasn't a request. Eleanor rarely made requests. We walked together slowly, and she stood at the hall window, looking out at the pale morning light with her hands clasped in front of her. She ended it with Richard last night, Eleanor said. Simply, like a weather report. I was quiet. He didn't take it particularly well, but he accepted it. She paused. She sat with me afterward for 2 hours. We talked. Really talked. The way we used to when she was young and the world felt very large and she wasn't yet sure she was large enough for it. I looked out the window. She asked me something, Eleanor continued. She asked me if I thought she was capable of letting someone in, truly in, not managed, not controlled, just in. My chest tightened. What did you tell her? Eleanor turned and looked at me with those clear, unhurried eyes. I told her I had been watching someone let themselves into my life every single day for months, without asking for credit, without expecting return, and that if she couldn't see what that looked like, she needed new glasses. She patted my arm once. I think she understood. She turned and walked slowly back to her apartment. At her door, she paused. She's on the roof terrace, Eleanor said. She goes up there when she's thinking. A small, certain smile. She's been up there since 6 this morning. The door closed. I stood in the hallway, then I took the stairs to the roof. She was standing at the railing when I pushed open the heavy terrace door, looking out over the city, the morning light falling across her in that particular way that makes ordinary moments look like they were composed deliberately. Her dark hair moved in the wind. Her arms were folded, not defensively. Just against the cold, she heard me. She didn't turn around immediately. "Eleanor sent you," she said. "Eleanor informed me," I said. "There's a difference." A pause. Then, quietly, she laughed. Small and real, just like that night in the kitchen. I walked to the railing and stood beside her. We were quiet for a moment. The city moved below us. Unhurried, indifferent, beautiful. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You don't. I do." She turned to look at me. Her eyes were clear. No armor, no careful management, nothing performed, just her. "I was using professionalism as a wall because I didn't know what else to use, and that wasn't fair to you. Diana, let me finish." Her voice was steady but soft. "Richard made me believe that the parts of me that aren't polished or directed or composed are liabilities, and I believed him for a long time." She paused. "But you kept showing up, every single day. And you never once asked me to be anything other than exactly what I was, even when what I was being was difficult and closed off and borderline rude." "Borderline," I said. She gave me a look. "Don't push it. There she is," I said quietly. Something in her expression broke open. Not painfully. The way a window breaks open, releasing something that needed air. "I'm scared," she said. Plainly. Honestly. Like it cost her something real to say it. "So am I," I said. She looked at me. Surprised, genuinely surprised. In the way that told me she hadn't expected that. Had perhaps never considered that someone might look at her and feel anything as uncertain as fear. "You are?" she asked. "You're not exactly uncomplicated," I said. "You color-code medication schedules. You corrected my shelf assembly. You thanked me like a vendor for 6 consecutive days." She pressed her lips together, beautifully failing to suppress a smile. "And yet," I continued more quietly now, "I took the stairs to the roof at 6:45 in the morning in my interview clothes, so." She looked at my jacket, then back at my face. "You have an interview," she said. "I have 20 minutes, Marcus, Diana." I turned to face her fully. "I'm not asking you to have everything figured out. I'm not asking you to be unafraid. I'm just asking whether you want to figure it out, together, slowly. Honestly, without performing anything for anyone." She held my gaze. The wind moved her hair. Below us, the city continued its ordinary, beautiful business. And then she unfolded her arms, that small, deliberate gesture, and reached out and took my hand. Not dramatically, just quietly. Like something that had already been decided a long time ago, and was only now being spoken aloud. Her fingers were cold from the morning air. I held them anyway. "You're going to be late," she said softly. "Probably," I said. Neither of us moved. I got the job, as it turned out. Diana cried when I told her, which she denied immediately and attributed to allergies, despite it being November. Eleanor, when we told her together that evening, simply nodded as though we had confirmed something she had always known to be true and had been waiting with extraordinary patience for us to catch up to. She reached out and held both our hands at once. And in that small, warm apartment, with the lamplight and the chamomile tea and the crossword she still refused to finish, something settled. Quietly, completely. Not a perfect ending, just a real one, the kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that simply arrives, on a rooftop, in the cold with your hand in someone else's, and feels with every part of you exactly like where you were always meant to be. If this story moved you the way it moved me writing it, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, stick around. There's so much more where this came from.